Hello world, this is Frida Reba Darcy, and I am Patricia O'Connor. The two of us, heavy anticipation, the two of us, we make a duo that we refer to ourselves as the Bonsai Balcony. A couple of girls with high opinions of themselves, and we're the Bonsai Balcony. Today, on the Bonsai Balcony, a little look. Everybody, we have oak trees. I got some bald cypress trees here that are pretty big. Got a wisteria or two living in the house. We got pine trees. We got trident maple trees. This one's getting an air layer. We have a little forest with codahimes. We got cork barks and pines. We've been doing this going on 5 years on this balcony, going on 5 years. Some of these trees we've had since the start. Some of them came along later. When I first started my second time around, I'll put it that way. When I got back into bonsai after growing up, I started watching YouTube videos, hopefully like what you're doing now, watching YouTube videos. Hello there, Mr. Crow. I have peanuts for you and a bowl of water. You don't have to be afraid. You can have it anytime you want it. When I first started doing this several years ago, my first trees were trees that I knew were to be easy. They were wisterias. If you can water a wisteria, you can keep a wisteria bonsai. Seemingly to me, if you didn't know enough about other trees, they would die. Not knowing enough about certain trees meant that you probably wouldn't keep them very long. Don't pay a lot of money for them, because they're going to die on you. So I ventured out slowly. I kind of just started expanding. And I was a year before I had a pine tree. We're looking at an oak now. Oak, again, give that guy 6 or 7 hours of direct sunlight a day and make sure that it doesn't go too dry. And it's a little bit more water tolerant or drought tolerant than most trees, but make sure you don't dry it out. And you can keep that. Now, keeping it nice is a different matter. You need to learn a little bit about pests and stuff. But I was a year before I got a pine tree, and the reason was when watching all of these videos, I was watching videos about maples, and I was watching videos about oaks, and I was watching videos about wisterias, because I had a wisteria, and I had a maple, and I had an oak pretty early in. Plus, I kept going out in the yard and digging up little baby oaks, and I would bring them in, and I discovered I couldn't keep them alive. I don't think I've ever collected a small oak planted by a squirrel that lived over a year. Maybe it's time I try that again. Maybe I've learned a few things since then. But I got the impression that pine trees were tricky. And I've kind of moved away from that because I got familiar with my fear. These are you're looking at several different species of pine here. That's a Japanese black pine. 20 years from seed. Grown by a local bonsai master, Jonas at Bonsai Tonight. He started that tree from seed around 20 years ago. How can he be 25 years old and started that from seed? I don't know. A couple of these others are Ponderosas. Those are an example of two different types of pines. When it comes to pine trees, and this is a pine show, by the way. When it comes to pine trees, we kind of break them down into groups. There's what we call multi-flush and single flush. When it comes to bonsai trees, there are trees that if bonsai were a gala event, there are trees that would automatically be on the front row. They just have a hierarchy in the world of bonsai, and they are basically 3 species of pines. The main one being Japanese black pine, although people who grow red pines will say the main one is the Japanese red pine, and then also the white pine. Those 3 pines are primarily from Japan, the main bonsaiable pine trees. Um, the black pine is called a multi-flush pine. The red pine, also a multi-flush pine. The white pine is called a single flush pine. My ponderosa here is a single flush pine. And what that means is, well, I'll just do the cap. I'll just do the little thing this way. One, a Japanese black pine, those evolved on the Japanese coastline where typhoons were a possibility. The Japanese red pine evolved a little farther up in the foothills, but still could be susceptible to high wind damage. The white pine is a higher elevation and didn't have that to worry about. It's more cold hardy, but usually doesn't have the wind issues that coastal trees would have to deal with. For that reason, the Japanese black pine, growing up on the coast and occasionally having to deal with a typhoon, which is a hurricane type storm, it could be stripped bare by high winds and have no needles. So it has adapted the ability to grow a second flush of needles predictably. And we have adapted that. We've figured out what's going on, and we've also figured out that if we go back and cut candles on these trees earlier in the year, we can get a second flush of candles, and those candles are future needles, and those can, will many times if we cut one, it'll come back with 4 or more. And then we can pick, and then the practice is to pick 2 based on what we feel about their uniformity. And I'm just showing you a Japanese black pine while we do this. You can see a few of the needles there are a little bit long. It's late spring. I need to go through and do a cleanup. And a cleanup is where if you give a needle a little tug and it comes right off, that's because it's already kind of distended out of its sheath somewhat, and it's ready for the right amount of breeze to come along and carry it away. But if you go through and pull them, then it looks better, faster. You don't have to wait for the wind to do that. And that's how we do cleanup on our Japanese black pines. So 30 minutes of that, and this tree would look a lot better. Also, those little needles sticking up kind of takes away from its uniformity, and also they're a little yellower than the greener ones that are newer. Same with this ponderosa. I've got some yellow needles here that were last year's sun damage, and then the greener needles are this year's, and they're happy. We treat different trees with different methods. The method to keep needles smaller on a Japanese black pine or to get them at a certain length, and we can decide whether we want the needles to be this big, or we want the needles to be that big, or whether we want the needles to be that big, based on how large our bonsai tree is. And there is a method to maintain a needle length that would be appropriate for that size tree. And if you take your tree and you put it into a show, they will be judging it based on needle length as opposed to its size, whether or not those conform to a convincing degree, or whether or not that's not the case. And there's a method to do that for white pines, red pines, and black pines. I'm going to leave a link at the bottom of this to one of the people that I consider to be my teachers. Bonsai Mirai links. These are some older links, but it's about multi-flush pines and single flush pines. And Ryan does really good lectures, and I think these lectures were in Ireland or something. But the information is exactly the same that he teaches now, and I'll have the links on how to get needle. Well, on the other hand, let's look at something else. This is the Ponderosa Pine. The size of this tree makes it a show hen, about a 6-inch tall tree. Now, the needle length of that is too long to be a convincing bonsai. It's single flush, high elevation. It's Ponderosa Pine, Ponderosa. And as Ponderosa pines, these are high elevation, single flush, which means in this case, it means those needles don't stop growing this year. They don't have a season. They just grow until this season's over, and they get really long. Ponderosas grow really, really long needles. If you have a large bonsai tree, this would be a fairly large bonsai tree, but there are also can be bigger than this bonsai trees, for instance. With a larger bonsai tree or a medium to larger bonsai tree, there is a method to shorten the needles to a believable length for a medium to large size ponderosa. For this to scale up, for instance, this is a 2-foot tall tree with needles that are 6 inches long. So if this were a 100-foot or an 80-foot tree, those needles would be 40-foot long. So that doesn't really work to scale. What we're doing about that is I'm grafting a smaller tree, a pine tree that has smaller needles. That little sprig you see sticking up there is my graft. That's Japanese black pine. And whenever that becomes a more dominant part of the tree and I've cut back all of the ponderosa foliage, I will be able to treat this tree like a Japanese black pine, and I'll be able to get the needles down to a more believable length like this and have them stay that way. Another method for doing that will be in the link. I'll drop a link of how to make needles shorter for ponderosa pines. And it'll be the same as the single flush pine with a little caveat. I'm not going to delve into all three methods or the two methods with all of their caveats, but I'm going to say, in order to make the needles smaller for this tree, there is a method that could make these needles a more believable length. I would still have a tree that's growing, that is evolved to be a high elevation, single leaf, long needle pine growing next to the coast, which would worry me and does worry me about the health of this tree. Grafting it with Japanese black pine does the thing what I was saying about the needles. I could also do that with a method, but this would also ensure that as that Japanese black pine takes over, I would then raise this tree as a Japanese black pine and not a ponderosa, and I wouldn't have to worry about it actually growing in a zone that it wasn't evolved for. Everything will be fine at that point. Having said that, our ponderosa is pushing out a lot of new growth right now. It's responding very favorably to the repotting that I did a few weeks ago. It's time for us now to just see whether, nothing happens for a little while after we repot and then the tree picks back up. We're in the picks back up portion of the program, and it's picked back up by pushing out growth all over the place. So I feel really good about that. But while I'm sitting there making this discussion, we started talking about this is also a little Yamadori ponderosa. The same method that I could use to make that ponderosa to its right needle smaller will probably, and it is the same method I'm starting on right here, but in reality, I will probably never get those needles small enough to be believable in a bonsai show. It would never, I will probably get the needles on this tree small enough to be attractive and to be a pretty little tree, but as far as getting those guys down to the tiny thing they would have to be in scale with this, I think the ponderosa species probably won't make a needle quite that small. So that's a compromise on my part. And that's why some species aren't seen to be the major hitters in bonsai. Whenever I started off this, I said in bonsai the major players are pines. I didn't go whole hauling it. When it comes to bonsai, the major players, and they are as dictated by the people who started us into bonsai, the Japanese. So Japanese maples are a big bonsai species, right? Junipers, all of your junipers are mostly huge, long, lots of information, lots of history about collected junipers in the mountains and becoming bonsai. There's some hundreds or 1,000-year-old junipers out there. And then pine. So I would say People also love of cherry trees and stuff. But when you look at cherry trees, those are more beautiful when they bloom, and the rest of the time, most of them, frankly, are pots and sticks and pots, I should say, which is, you know, you spend the rest of the year waiting for it to bloom again and have that really one beautiful part, and the rest of the time, it just is kind of probably one of tends in a lot of gardens it's their least impressive bonsai. But this used to mention, a few of the other trees that people, anything can be a bonsai. I've seen people bonsai ivy. I have seen people bonsai roses. So, but having said that, the reason that we have those main species of bonsai, and I said them as black pines, red pines, and white pines, is because there is a school of thought and a reasoning and a method for making those trees believable, and their barking over characteristics are usually seen as desirable. Having said that, there are things that you do with pines in the year to maintain their energy. If you don't try to maintain the energy of a pine, it'll grow up more and more dominant on the top, and the part of the bottom parts of the tree that help give it its character it will cast them off. So we always have to be concerned with taking a little bit of the energy off of the top of our tree while we pamper a little bit the energy on the lower part, or the tree will start becoming top dominant and kill off its lower branches. That's what pines do. Apical dominance means it would rather grow a fancy top and then outgrow another fancy top the year after that. And it'll kill off stuff down here in order to do that. It's just like one will make way for the other. Pines are not as hard to grow as I thought. Pines are more rewarding to grow than I could have imagined. I've just absolutely found them to be rewarding, and I actually wouldn't recommend the way I did it. I decided, well, if you got a pine that cost a little bit of money and was really impressive, you would love that tree, but it would also make you nervous to have it. It's exactly what I did. And then you will have to learn things because you will be afraid of losing. Yeah, that's learning through fear. Don't do that to yourself voluntarily, but I did. And I got this tree and I got that tree when I didn't really know a whole lot about them, but I needed to learn quick because I don't want to see. I've seen trees that are, that's what I call top tight right. That's like it just had a really good hairdo. Everything's pointed in the right direction. It's all about an equal length, and everything looks pretty good in uniform. We don't be overly uniform. It's a tree, but when it comes to the foliage and stuff, that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. There's room for improvement, but I could do a little bit more cleanup on that. But I'm liking that pretty good. If you have one of these for a couple of years and it starts to look scraggly, it's because you're not doing your lessons, and they are needle thinning, candle pruning, energy allocation, and then water and feeding. So that is what's up with pines. In order to have pines, you just need to learn stuff, and the stuff that you have to learn, it's not all that complicated. It's just ways of responding to what the tree does naturally. I find that pines, black pines especially, are very, very bendable and foldable, and we have just gone to town on our little bitty Japanese black pines and just pretzeled those guys up into nobody's business, and had a good deal of success. We've lost some, but it's not like they were $1 million trees either. Out of a dozen, I end up with 6 or 7, sometimes 8 or 9 really impressive little trees. And in 4 years, you can have a mame black pine that is by my way of thinking, an impressive little tree, and they'll bark over a little sooner if they're potted. I also find that it is a great learning tool to start off with little trees. You can overwater pines. Some pines like more water than others. Japanese black pines, if you overwater them, they'll turn yellow. I haven't grown white pines here, and I haven't grown red pines here because I'm told that on the coast they don't do well at low elevation. I'm told that we're very lucky that we can have all these black pines that we want, that they're basically evolved in a climate much like ours. So to that end, I have found that first I ordered 10 seedlings. Those are scattered around the balcony. I wired them and potted them up really soon. After that, I bought a bag of seeds, and I started popping these in my kitchen. People have told me this before, and I will agree to what they said and repeat it because it is so true. It is way easier, and I don't mean 60 pine trees at a time, but it's way easier to figure out how to correctly water more pines than it is one pine. If you have one little pine tree and this is your idea, you're going to get one little pine tree and see how it goes. Every once in a while, a pine tree just dies. I'll have a whole tray of trees doing great, and one of them, just one day, boom, it's dead. That was probably a genetic defect or something. That was going to happen. There was a ticking time bomb in there. Now, what if that would have been my one tree? I would have thought, well, you killed that, right? So also, it's hard to know when you're overwatering and when you're underwatering. If you've got a number of one and you're basing all of that on information based on one, then it's really hard to know whether you're under or over. But if you've got 8, whoop, right? Costs almost nothing to have 8. Can water and care for those with one of these, right? Not that big of a deal. But if they start turning yellow, I set one off to the side and water it more, or I set one off to the side and I'll water it less. And in 2 days, I will know whether or not it was yellow because it was overwatered or underwatered, and then I will do the rest of the others. I don't even have to break it down that way. It becomes so much more instinctual when you're looking at more than one tree. And when you're looking at one tree, you're not really sure if what you're doing is right or wrong. And in a way that whenever you have just a few more trees than that, it's pretty darn obvious, right? I would say if they were all that color, I'm probably overwatering them. But there's the only one that's that color, so it's probably just having an issue. It'll look greener in a couple of days. That's what I mean whenever I say it's easier to grow a few than one. Space is an allocation. You have to water your pine trees every day. On hot days, I will water them more than once. I would say when it comes to some trees are a matter of really great. I've seen people make really beautiful, and in the United States, we go into canyons and stuff. If we find some canyon trees, they're not going to necessarily be red pines. That species didn't grow here. Our version of that was probably a Ponderosa, and those needles are way long and they're always kind of twisted and squirrely and just kind of bent out of shape looking. But there is ways around that, and I've seen some really, really beautiful Ponderosa pines. On the other side of that, whenever you're talking about smaller trees that will probably never have the right proportions, that's a love of the species, probably closer to cult than actual bonsai. In order to make this a show-worthy tree, I would probably need to graft it the way I'm doing the big one. I'm doing the big one because I want to make sure that it stays happy and healthy in this climate. And also, I know better the method for making needles smaller on Japanese black pines than I do single flush pines, for which, aside from these few ponderosas, I don't have a lot of single flush pines here. Pine trees are very forgiving. I was told the ponderosas may not do well here, and I was also told that I could have them. I've been told both with equal conviction. So to make sure that this wasn't going to die on me long enough to get grafted, I I bought a dozen, no, 10. Pick a number, Pat. I bought 10 little ponderosas, and they were planted in little cubes. They didn't even come with pots, plugs, they call them. And they were super, super healthy. They came out of Oregon. I don't know if they're the same subspecies that this guy and this guy is, and that subspecies is Ponderosa scopularum, and there are others. And I've been told that scopularum is the more desirable species for bonsai because it backbuds a little more, and because its needle length is supposed to be a little bit more durable. I'm not familiar with the other subspecies enough to go into more detail about that. This is just stuff listening to Bonsai Ryan at Bonsai Mirai, who is a big lover of Ponderosa pines. I would recommend anybody maybe stop by his site and look at the different varieties of canyon trees that are twisted and sculpted and very dynamic in their design. And they're absolutely beautiful trees. And every once in a while, if I ever feel like I'm losing my way a little bit, I'll stroll by that place and then just pull up pictures and do a little look-see. And if I find that very inspiring, and it also tells me what it is I'm looking for. What it is I'm looking for in here is this is a pretty large tree. As stated earlier, it's a ponderosa. That means that it's a single flush. That means that it's a long needle, high elevation. On the other side of those buildings is the beach. So I live at I'm 4 floors up, so that's basically my elevation. I'm at an elevation of 80 feet maybe. Not quite that much. I'm at an elevation of 60 feet because I'm on the 4th floor. We'll say that. Anyway, we're at sea level basically. So this tree was not actually evolved to live here. In its climate, it usually sees temperatures that are at or below zero for at least sometimes. It can survive being in frozen ground for months at a time. It doesn't like being overwatered. It will die from overwatering before a Japanese black pine will. But having said that, it can survive wet ground that freezes over like a block. That won't allow the roots to rot. And evidently they can survive being frozen to an extent that if it doesn't get a certain amount of freezing temperatures a year, the tree will not shut down and rest, and it will run itself into the ground and die. A symptom of that would be a single flush tree producing a second flush of needles towards the end of the growing season. Like, for instance, if it's here in August and it's producing a second flush of needles, that is not good, because where this tree came from, it would normally be in snow and be in dormancy by this point. And the part where it's pushing out a second flush of needles means it's wide awake and staying up all night. And a couple of years of that, the tree will die. So the ways around that are to get 36 hours of below freezing in the winter. Somehow, some way you can accumulate that. You can do that in a week or weekend, or off and on over a couple of days over the course of the winter, but accumulate 36 hours of freezing or below so that it will go into its hibernation state, and or graft the tree with the species that finds this climate more suitable. The meter's running, you got a couple of years. If it takes over and takes off, you're good. If it doesn't, you better plan on overwintering the tree somewhere. I overwintered this tree last year, winter before last. I overwintered this tree in Northern California, and it achieved it. So we should have been good for a couple of years, and right now we're building different foliage. I would like to have 2 or 3 more grafts like that, but I think we're still going to be good. I overwintered this tree by putting it in the freezer section of my refrigerator last year. I'm going to do that again this year for 36 hours. I do that by going overnight for 8 hours in the top portion of my freezer with the door open a crack. And I also wrap the pot in a towel so it doesn't become an ice block. When that, I say the roots freeze over in the wild quite often, but I don't know that that's all of them. And so yeah, it's in a bonsai pot. So I would wrap that in a towel to keep the pot itself from becoming the block of ice. You know, just something to put a little air between it and the freezer. And then I open the door of the freezer so that we don't pull a vacuum on the door, pull a vacuum on the food in there. And when I go to bed at night, my alarm's set for about 8 hours. When I get up the next morning, I pop it out of there and put it in the refrigerator so that it starts warming up. And then before I go to work, out the door, I will take it from there and bring it outside where it'll be 40, 50 degrees because I will have done this during the winter anyway. I do that because we don't get freezing temperatures here. If you wanted a Ponderosa pine and you wanted to grow it as a happy Ponderosa pine, the question you should ask yourself, does it freeze? Does it freeze 3 or 4 days a year in the winter? And if the answer is no, you know, if you live in Houston, if you live on the Texas Gulf Coast, or you live in LA, or you live in some place where you're not going to see a freezing temperature every year, then you might not want to grow a Ponderosa, or you might want to, or if you've got that love, you've got the fever for a Pondo, you should know that to keep that tree healthy, you're going to have to either overwinter that tree someplace colder, or you're going to have to graft it with the species of pine that it, 1, would like, and 2, would be more suitable to the climate that you're growing in. And that's how I get away around that. Now, so I've gone from being intimidated by Japanese black pines to popping them from seed and then being told I can't have a certain species of pine, only to decide that I now love that species of pine just because somebody told me I can't have it. There might be some of that. However, these trees have a lot going for them too. So, you know, there are people out there for whom they will always be singing the praises of a Japanese black pine. And yeah, there are always people who are going to fall into that cult thing. I remember hearing one of the teachers discussing a show in Japan that had a bald cypress in it, and it was an American flat top style. And they were following behind some of the judges who were going through and listening to the judges go on and on and on about a tree they had seen 10 minutes before. They could not stop complaining about the bald cypress they had seen because it was a flat top and didn't conform to bonsai design. And he thought, well, he needed, you know, this bonsai teacher said, well, I need to change that. I need to change that that perception that a flat top, American flat top, is not suitable for bonsai. And I think the guy went a long way towards that. Having said that, I'm not growing my bald cypresses to be flat tops. I'm growing them to be the more traditional, formal uprights. We're not talking about cypresses, though. I found these trees really easy to grow, and that's one reason why I grew them. I shied off for over a year on my Japanese black pines because, one, I knew I wanted what was considered big league bonsai, and men had always been major players in bonsai, and masculine trees have always been major players in bonsai. Japanese black pines were always one of the trees that said dynamic, masculine, and has always been a major player in bonsai. So I, early on, I wanted to get over my intimidation. So I thought for a second as a newbie, I was so impressed by cork bark Japanese black pines that when an 80-year-old tree became cork bark black pine, became available, I thought to myself, that's the ultimate Japanese black pine. That right there is the ultimate. They're not. they're a tree with an ailment. If you think of bonsai trees as being specimens of perfection, then yeah, that's nice. And that is a lot of times how black pines are presented. Masculine, beautiful examples of perfection. And a cork bark Japanese black pine just is not that. It is a tree that makes really thick bark, and it does so, and it makes really thick branches that do really neat tricks, but it does so at the risk of its own health. These will always be kind of anemic trees. Yeah. The ultimate Japanese black pine would be a Japanese black pine that's full of health and full of vigor and has been grown by a master and shows good bonsai technique. This is an 80-year-old tree. I'm its third human being. Japanese cork bark black pine. They don't know why they become cork bark. It's not a species. The species is black pine. The part where it's a cork bark is more of a mutation due to some illness. I don't know if I'm saying it right because we don't really know what it is. Most species of pine are capable of having a cork bark anomaly. And in Japanese black pines, it's said to be a 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 trees will be a cork bark. So I fell for this early, and I fell for it in the ways that sometimes you think, oh, that's great, that's the ultimate. And then as you get a little bit older, you're like, yeah, now I understand why every bonsai master didn't beat me to the auctioning table to buy this. And I didn't buy it at an auction. I bought it when it came listed on the internet. But from a gardener who I knew and trusted. But I love my cork bark trees, but they are finicky. And I don't know any gardeners who have a bunch of these. I think once you can check this off for your list and go, that's a pretty tree, and I really am happy with my tree. But I don't really know of any gardeners who have decided to be exclusive and only go cork bark, because they also have their minuses to them. They're harder to develop. They're harder to keep healthy. They're harder to wire. Their vascular system is not as healthy. Their root system is such that you almost never find one of these in the wild because they will not survive on their own. And a lot of times they won't survive on their own rootstock. Whenever you see a cork bark tree, it almost always has a flaw somewhere, and that they're all grafted. You can tell this tree is a grafted tree. The graft starts right here. Right there. From where the plate starts getting really thick. That's where this is the root stock of a Japanese black pine, and this was a grafted sprout on the top of it 80 years ago. I'm the third human being to be taking care of this tree. It's an honor. This one, 20 years from seed from a local grower. You would know them as Jonas. You may also know them by their blog, Bonsai Tonight. I would recommend that you, if you don't know of Jonas and or Bonsai Tonight, that you should get to know. That's a wealth of information there from he and Lauren are awesome. Yeah, they just came back from a big trip in Japan, and he just also released a book here recently, and he's published more than one book on bonsai, and I think I have what he's published so far. If he's done something and I don't have an example of it, I'm not aware. But yeah, anyway, 20-year-old Japanese black pine from seed. I have found with my balcony that there is nothing about about my space here that makes it impossible for me to grow pines. They are sun hungry. I thought that they would be a challenge for my lighting conditions. You can kind of see I don't have any sunlight on that wall. I will have in a couple more. Oh yeah, you can. There's a little bit of a shadow just starting to fade in. But that shadow will rake across the wall as the day goes longer. But for the first half of the day, these guys are it. And those are my daylight full spectrum LED lights. They don't use, in the last couple of years, the advent of LEDs has made this possible. If it weren't for the advent of LED lighting, in order to get this kind of light exposure from artificial light, I would have to have probably 3 metal halides, and that would be over $100 a month in a power bill. I believe here in the Bay Area, 3 1,000 watt metal halides, they draw a lot of amps. Yeah, it's actually, they will draw 30 amps while they're on. It's drawing 30 amps. That would be a lot of electricity. That would be a lot of heat. That would be a lot of humidity. That would be extra watering. That would be water in humidity and mold damage. I mean, whenever you increase the heat, you increase the problems. So the invention of LEDs, these things make no heat. I see little birds sitting on them. And if I wanted to do this under a balcony that was in constant shadow because it was facing the wrong way or because it was a building in front of me, I would just use this as my source. These guys stay on for 6.5 hours to make sure that the backside of this tree and the backside of my other trees get enough light and don't grow funny. That gives us a lot of exposure during the day, but sometimes it's not direct. The only thing that's in direct sunlight right here is this branch isn't. Kind of see the difference. Boom, just fell into light. Boom, just fell into light. So this makes sure that anything this far in gets at least its minimum requirements of 6 hours of direct sunlight. And with that, I'm able to keep all my pines happy. That is a little bit about pines. They're not as hard as the rookie or beginner might think. It's easier to overwater a pine than it is a bald cypress or a wisteria for sure. If you overwater them, they'll turn yellow and then they will stop taking up nutrients and the roots will die back and then you'll lose them. If you underwater them and you get a 90-degree day, you could lose them in a day. So if given a choice between slightly under and slightly over, I work 4 days a week, which means I'm off 3 days a week, which means I'm kind of watering forced 4 days a week. Like I wouldn't leave for work and leave these guys this dry. They can go a little while before I water them, but I wouldn't take off for 8 hours and leave them looking at like that. So I would water them early. And if 4 days of water them a little early means that whenever I get my day off again and they're a little yellow, then on those days I'll water them a little bit later in the day and let them get a little drier. And by the time I'm going back to work, we're all greened up again. As our summer rolls on and our water demands go up, because I know that I'm always going to water them anyway, I find that balance easier. They basically are thirsty more. So I don't have to wait for them to get thirsty. When I get up in the morning, I can water them. When I come in the afternoon, sometimes they look like they need to be watered, and sometimes I can go, nope, we can do this tomorrow morning. All right, pine trees. They are a staple of bonsai. They are very, very rewarding to grow. Some of them are easier to bend than others. I've found Japanese black pines to be very forgiving. If you crack a branch on a Japanese black pine, that doesn't mean you killed it. Quite often, if I want to bend a branch a whole lot, I'll bend it and wait and start watching for it to tear or open up. And then once that tear develops, that tells me where to watch and how much more I can bend it, because it's not a matter of stopping just because you saw the bark separate. We can sit there and open that up a little bit more until we start to see it get a little fibrous. At that point, we want to hold steady. That most of the time that does not kill the water flow. If you do cause a break that cuts off the lifeline, a pine will allocate other avenues. It will move the water laterally or forward or back or up or down or whatever it has to do to go past the broken impasse and continue to feed the foliage. That's one thing pines can do. And that makes it easier when it comes to black pines. That makes all of that heavy folding and bending and pretzeling I did to some of these guys very, very survivable in a way that I wouldn't get away with necessarily with my ponderosas. Having said that, when you go to the canyons, we do see those guys pretty twisted. This is one of my little ponderosas, and that's another one of my little ponderosas. And as you see, I've got quite a bit of twist and movement in those guys. But it's a little trickier to do. You're not always as successful as I would be doing that with my black pines. Having said that, from what they tell me, a limber pine was probably named that out of sarcasm, because in a demonstration I saw of a limber pine, the thing just broke. It broke if you looked at it funny. I thought, wow, they call that a limber pine. Like and subscribe if you guys don't already. Our next drop will be midweek when we come back around to our Wednesdays, our midday off. It is beautiful. It is a warm day. It has been pretty breezy for the last couple, but that's died down. Beautiful Sunday out. I hope wherever you are, you're enjoying your day, and I appreciate you. And Frida Reba Darcy appreciates you. And thank you for watching the Bonsai Balcony.